The crystal chandelier cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as waiters moved silently through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with champagne glasses. This wasn't just any party. This was one of Alexander Blackwell's famous charity events, and everyone who mattered in New York City was here. Alexander stood near the massive windows of his penthouse, looking out at the glittering city below. At 32, he had everything money could buy. His tech company had made him billions before he turned 30. He owned houses in 5 countries, drove cars that cost more than most people's homes, and wore watches that could feed a family for years. But tonight, like every night, he felt empty inside. Alexander, darling. A woman in a bright red dress approached him, her jewelry sparkling under the lights. This party is simply divine. You've outdone yourself again. He smiled the same fake smile he'd been wearing all evening. Thank you, Victoria. I'm glad you're enjoying it. The truth was, Alexander found these people boring. They talked about the same things, bought the same expensive items, and laughed at the same unfunny jokes. He'd grown up with money, inherited even more, and then made his own fortune. But somewhere along the way, he'd started looking down on everyone else. In his mind, people were divided into 2 groups, those who had money and those who didn't, and those who didn't simply weren't worth his time. Have you seen the piano tonight? Victoria asked, pointing toward the center of the room. It's absolutely gorgeous. Alexander's eyes moved to his prized possession. The 1925 Steinway Model D concert grand piano sat like a black jewel in the middle of his living room. It had belonged to his grandfather, then his father, and now him. The thing was worth nearly $3 million, but to Alexander, it meant much more than money. It represented everything his family stood for: class, sophistication, excellence. Beautiful, isn't it? Alexander said, walking toward the piano with Victoria following behind. Several other guests noticed them moving and joined the small group gathering around the instrument. Does anyone actually play it? Asked Robert, a banker who'd known Alexander since college. Alexander laughed, but there was no warmth in the sound. Play it? Robert, this isn't some toy piano from a music store. This is a concert-grade instrument. It requires real skill, real training, real talent. He ran his hand along the smooth surface of the piano, his voice growing louder as more people gathered around. Most people think they can play piano because they took a few lessons as children. They sit down and plunk out some simple tune and think they're musicians. The crowd chuckled, hanging on his every word. Alexander loved having an audience. It made him feel important, powerful. Take Patricia here, he said, gesturing to a woman in a blue dress. I bet she thinks she can play piano, don't you, Patricia? Patricia blushed and shook her head. Oh no, Alexander. I wouldn't dare touch such a beautiful instrument. Smart woman, Alexander said with a grin, because this piano deserves better than amateur attempts. It deserves someone who truly understands music, someone with real training and natural talent. He was getting carried away now, his voice growing more dramatic with each word. The champagne had loosened his tongue, and the attention from his guests fed his ego. In fact, Alexander announced, his voice rising above the party chatter, I'll make you all a promise. If anyone here can truly play this piano, and I mean really play it, not just bang out some children's song, I'll marry them on the spot. The crowd erupted in laughter. Someone started clapping, and soon everyone was applauding Alexander's bold declaration. You're crazy, Alexander, shouted someone from the back. He's serious, laughed another guest. Alexander Blackwell doesn't make promises he won't keep. Alexander soaked up the attention, raising his champagne glass high in the air. I'm completely serious. Anyone who can show me real musical talent on this piano will become my spouse tonight. But I'm not worried. None of you have what it takes. What Alexander didn't notice was the young woman standing near the wall holding a tray of empty glasses. She'd been moving through the crowd all evening, invisible to the wealthy guests who barely glanced at the serving staff. Her name was Maya Chen, and she was 28 years old. Unlike the people around her wearing designer clothes and expensive jewelry, Maya wore the simple black and white uniform of the catering company. Her long black hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her hands that should have been soft and pampered, showed the rough signs of hard work. Maya had been listening to Alexander's boastful speech while collecting empty glasses from side tables. With each word that came out of his mouth, she felt her anger growing. She knew exactly what kind of person Alexander was. She'd served at enough of these parties to recognize the type, rich, spoiled, and convinced that money made him better than everyone else. The way he talked about real talent and amateur attempts made her want to speak up. But Maya couldn't afford to lose this job. She needed every dollar she could earn. 3 years ago, her world had changed completely when her grandmother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Maya had been forced to give up everything to become her grandmother's caregiver. Before that, Maya's life had been very different. She'd graduated from one of the best music schools in the country. She'd won competitions and performed in concert halls. Music critics had called her a rising star and a once-in-a-generation talent. But now she worked 3 jobs just to pay for her grandmother's medical care and medication. During the day, she gave piano lessons to children in a small music shop. In the evenings, she worked for the catering company. And on weekends, she played background music at hotel restaurants. None of the wealthy people at this party knew any of this. To them, she was just part of the invisible army of workers who made their comfortable lives possible. As Alexander continued his mocking speech about musical talent, Maya felt something snap inside her. She'd spent 3 years watching her dreams fade away while working to support the person she loved most in the world. And now she had to listen to this privileged man making fun of people who he thought weren't good enough to touch his precious piano. Maya set down her tray and looked at the beautiful instrument sitting in the center of the room. Her fingers tingled with muscle memory. It had been months since she'd played on a piano of this quality. Alexander was still talking, his voice getting louder and more obnoxious with each word. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. My challenge stands. But don't worry. I'm not concerned about having to follow through on my promise. Real musical talent is rare, and it certainly isn't found among... He paused, noticing that people were looking past him toward something else. Alexander turned around and saw Maya walking slowly toward the piano. "Excuse me," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "I think you're needed in the kitchen." Maya didn't respond. She just kept walking toward the piano, her heart pounding with 3 years' worth of suppressed anger and lost dreams. Maya's footsteps echoed softly against the marble floor as she walked toward the piano. The room had gone quiet except for the gentle clinking of glasses and hushed whispers. Every eye was on her now. Alexander watched her approach with a mixture of confusion and annoyance. Who did this server think she was? This was his party, his piano, and his challenge. The help wasn't supposed to participate in the entertainment. "I'm sorry, but I think there's been a misunderstanding," Alexander said loudly, making sure everyone could hear him. "This challenge is for my guests, not the catering staff." Maya stopped walking and turned to face him. For the first time all evening, she looked directly into his eyes. What she saw there was exactly what she'd expected, the cold dismissal of someone who thought she didn't belong. "You said anyone," Maya replied quietly. Her voice was steady, but inside her heart was racing. "You said if anyone could truly play this piano, you'd marry them." The crowd began to murmur. Some people laughed nervously, unsure if this was part of some planned entertainment. Others looked uncomfortable, sensing the tension building between Alexander and the young woman in the server's uniform. Alexander's face flushed red. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he considered beneath him. "Listen, I'm sure you're a lovely person, but this is a very expensive instrument. It's not appropriate for you to... Are you backing down from your promise?" Maya interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "In front of all these people?" The question hung in the air like a challenge thrown down at a duel. Alexander looked around at his guests, all watching to see how he would handle this unexpected situation. His reputation was built on being a man of his word, someone who never backed down from a challenge. But this was different. This was some random worker trying to embarrass him at his own party. "Of course I'm not backing down," Alexander said, his voice sharp. "But let's be realistic here. Do you have any idea what kind of piano this is? This isn't some toy you can bang around on. This instrument requires years of training, real education, serious talent." Maya felt her hands clench into fists. Every word out of his mouth reminded her of everything she'd lost, everything she'd given up. The concerts she'd never performed, the recordings she'd never made, the career that had died when she chose love over ambition. "I understand," she said simply. "May I?" Alexander looked at her for a long moment. Part of him wanted to say no, to have security escort her out of his penthouse. but he could feel the eyes of his guests on him, waiting to see what he would do. If he refused now, he'd look like a coward. And Alexander Blackwell was many things, but he wasn't a coward. "Fine," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Go ahead. Play something. But when you're done embarrassing yourself, I expect you to get back to work." Maya nodded and continued walking toward the piano. Each step felt like a journey back through time. Back to the person she used to be before life forced her to become someone else. She reached the piano bench and stood there for a moment, running her fingers along the smooth black surface of the instrument. It was even more beautiful up close. The wood gleamed under the chandelier light, and she could see her reflection in the polished surface. Maya sat down on the bench and adjusted it to the right height. It had been 3 months since she'd played anything more complex than background music at a hotel restaurant. Her last real performance had been at a small charity event, playing simple songs that wouldn't challenge her or draw too much attention. But this piano deserved better than simple songs. Alexander stood behind her, arms crossed, waiting for her to make a fool of herself. Around the room, his guests had stopped their conversations and were watching with curious interest. "Take your time," Alexander said sarcastically, "though I should warn you this piano is worth more than most people make in a lifetime. Try not to damage it." Maya placed her hands on the keys but didn't press down yet. She closed her eyes and let herself remember what it felt like to really play, to pour her soul into music instead of just playing notes to pay bills. When she opened her eyes again, something had changed. The nervous woman in the server's uniform was gone, replaced by someone Alexander had never seen before. Maya's fingers found the keys, and she began to play. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 in C minor filled the room like liquid gold. This wasn't the gentle background music that usually played at Alexander's parties. This was real music, powerful and complex and absolutely breathtaking. Alexander's smug expression disappeared instantly. His mouth fell open as he listened to music like he'd never heard before. Not in person, not in his own home, not from his own piano. Maya's fingers moved across the keys with impossible grace and precision. Every note was perfect. Every phrase shaped with the skill of someone who didn't just know how to play piano, but understood music at a level that couldn't be taught. The room was completely silent except for the music. Guests who had been chatting and laughing moments before now stood frozen, champagne glasses forgotten in their hands. This wasn't just competent playing. This was the work of a master. Maya lost herself in the music the way she used to years ago. For these few minutes, she wasn't a struggling caregiver working 3 jobs to make ends meet. She was the musician she'd trained to be, the artist she'd dreamed of becoming. The piece was incredibly difficult, full of rapid passages that would challenge even professional pianists. But Maya played it like she was having a conversation with an old friend. Her hands knew exactly where to go, exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly how to bring out every emotion hidden in the composer's notes. Alexander stood behind her in shock. He'd heard this piece performed by some of the world's best orchestras, but never like this. Never with such passion and technical skill combined so perfectly. Around the room, people began to react. A woman near the window had tears streaming down her face. A man who'd been checking his phone put it away and gave Maya his complete attention. Even the other catering staff had stopped working and were listening with amazement. Maya reached the end of the first movement and seamlessly moved into the second. The music shifted from powerful and dramatic to gentle and heartbreaking. She played with such emotion that everyone in the room could feel her pain, her loss, her love for music that had never really died. Alexander found himself stepping closer to the piano, drawn by music unlike anything he'd ever experienced. He could see Maya's face in profile as she played, and what he saw there surprised him. This wasn't someone trying to prove a point or win a bet. This was someone coming home after a long journey. As the final notes of the concerto faded away, the room remained silent for what felt like forever. Maya sat still on the bench, her hands resting on the keys, her eyes closed. Then someone started clapping. Slowly at first, then faster and louder. Soon the entire room erupted in applause unlike anything Alexander had ever heard at one of his parties. People were cheering, some crying, all of them amazed by what they'd just witnessed. Maya opened her eyes and turned around on the bench to face the room. The spell was broken, and she was back to being a server at a party where she didn't belong. But everything had changed. Alexander stared at her, his mind racing to understand what had just happened. This woman, this server he'd dismissed so casually, had just given the most incredible musical performance he'd ever heard. And according to his own words, spoken in front of dozens of witnesses, he was now supposed to marry her. The applause slowly died down, but the energy in the room remained electric. Alexander stood frozen, staring at Maya as if seeing her for the first time. His mind struggled to process what had just happened. This woman, whom he'd dismissed as just another server, had just performed one of the most challenging pieces in classical music, with the skill of a world-class concert pianist. The sound still echoed in his ears, haunting and beautiful in ways he couldn't describe. Maya rose from the piano bench, her hands trembling slightly. The adrenaline from performing was wearing off, and reality was crashing back down on her. She'd just exposed herself completely in front of a room full of strangers, revealing talents she'd kept hidden for years. That was... Alexander started to speak but couldn't find the words. He'd heard professional orchestras perform that same piece, but never with such raw emotion and technical perfection. Incredible, finished Victoria, who was still wiping tears from her eyes. I've never heard anything like that in my life. Other guests began crowding around Maya, their earlier dismissive attitudes completely forgotten. These were people who attended the most exclusive cultural events in the city, who thought they knew what good music sounded like. "Where did you learn to play like that?" asked Robert, his voice full of genuine amazement. "Are you a professional musician?" Another guest chimed in. Maya looked around at all the faces staring at her with newfound respect and curiosity. An hour ago, these same people had barely noticed her existence. Now they hung on her every word. I used to be," Maya said quietly. "A long time ago." Alexander finally found his voice. "Used to be what exactly?" Maya took a deep breath. There was no point in hiding the truth now. "I was a concert pianist. I graduated from Juilliard and won the Van Cliburn International Piano Competition when I was 25. The room went silent again. The Van Cliburn competition was one of the most prestigious piano competitions in the world. Winners were guaranteed international careers and recording contracts. "The Van Cliburn?" Victoria gasped. "But that means you're famous. You're one of the best pianists in the world." "I was," Maya corrected. 3 years ago I gave it all up." Alexander stepped closer, his earlier arrogance replaced by genuine curiosity. "Why would anyone give up a career like that?" Maya's expression grew sad. "My grandmother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. She raised me after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. She gave up everything to take care of me, so when she got sick, I gave up everything to take care of her." The room remained quiet as Maya continued her story. "The medical bills were enormous. Insurance didn't cover everything. I had to choose between my career and making sure she got the best care possible." "But surely you could have found another way," someone suggested. "Couldn't other family members help?" Maya shook her head. "She was all I had left. And I was all she had. I couldn't abandon her to chase my dreams." Alexander felt something strange happening in his chest. Was this what guilt felt like? He'd spent the entire evening mocking people he considered beneath him. And here was a woman who'd sacrificed everything for love. "So what do you do now?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "I work 3 jobs, Maya replied matter-of-factly. "I give piano lessons to children during the day. I work for the catering company in the evenings, and on weekends I play background music at hotels and restaurants." "Background music?" Victoria looked horrified. "But you're incredible. You should be performing in concert halls, not playing dinner music." Maya smiled sadly. "Concert halls don't pay enough to cover medical bills. And besides, the classical music world moves fast. 3 years away might as well be 30. Nobody remembers Maya Chen anymore." Alexander was quiet, processing everything he'd learned. This woman had given up fame and fortune to care for someone she loved. Meanwhile, he spent his days buying expensive toys and looking down on people who worked honest jobs to support their families. "I remember you," said an older man who'd been quiet until now. "I'm Dr. Harrison from the Philharmonic Board. I was at your debut performance with the New York Symphony 5 years ago. You were extraordinary then, and you're even better now." Maya's eyes widened. She remembered that performance. It had been one of the highlights of her career, playing Chopin's Piano Concerto No. 1 with one of the world's most respected orchestras. "Dr. Harrison," she said, clearly surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here." I've been following your career, he continued. Or rather, I've been wondering where you disappeared to. You were supposed to be the next great American pianist. Then suddenly, you vanished from the scene entirely. I had more important things to take care of, Maya said simply. Alexander watched this exchange with growing amazement. Not only was Maya incredibly talented, but she'd been on the verge of international stardom when she gave it all up. The sacrifice she'd made was even greater than he'd realized. Wait, Alexander said suddenly, remembering his earlier declaration. I made a promise tonight. The room buzzed with nervous energy as everyone remembered why this conversation had started. Alexander had publicly declared that he would marry anyone who could truly play his piano. Alexander, Victoria said carefully, surely you weren't serious about that. I'm always serious about my promises, Alexander replied, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. I said anyone who could truly play this piano would become my spouse. Maya looked at him with a mixture of anger and disbelief. You think this is some kind of joke? You think I played your piano to trick you into marriage? No, Alexander struggled to find the right words. I don't know what to think right now. Well, let me make this easy for you, Maya said, her voice growing stronger. I don't want to marry you. I don't want anything from you. I played your piano because you were being cruel and dismissive, and I wanted to show you that you don't know everything about people. She turned to address the room. I didn't come here tonight to win some contest or prove a point. I came here to work, to earn money to pay for my grandmother's medication. That's all I wanted. Alexander felt smaller with each word she spoke. Here was a woman of incredible talent and character, and he treated her like she was worthless. Maya, he said quietly, I owe you an apology. You owe a lot of people apologies, she replied. Everyone you've ever looked down on because they didn't have as much money as you. The truth of her words hit Alexander like a physical blow. How many talented, worthy people had he dismissed over the years simply because they didn't travel in his social circle? Dr. Harrison stepped forward. Maya, I know this isn't the right time or place, but I have to ask. Would you consider performing with us again? The Philharmonic would welcome you back with open arms. Maya's expression softened. Dr. Harrison, that's very kind, but I can't commit to a performance schedule. My grandmother needs constant care. What if we worked around your schedule? He pressed. Even one performance would be a gift to the music world. Alexander watched Maya's face as she considered the offer. He could see the longing in her eyes, the part of her that missed performing for audiences who truly appreciated music. An idea began forming in Alexander's mind. A way to maybe possibly begin to make up for his terrible behavior tonight. What if, Alexander said slowly, we could find a way to make both things possible? Maya looked at him suspiciously. What do you mean? What if there was a way for you to perform again while still taking care of your grandmother? That's impossible, Maya said. I've looked into every option. Good care costs more than I can make, even working 3 jobs. Alexander took a deep breath. He was about to do something he'd never done before in his adult life. He was about to help someone without expecting anything in return. What if it didn't have to cost you anything? Maya stared at Alexander with deep suspicion. After everything that had happened tonight, she wasn't about to trust some wealthy man's sudden offer of help. What are you talking about? She asked, crossing her arms. Nothing in life is free, especially not from people like you. Alexander winced at her words, but he knew he deserved them. I'm talking about covering your grandmother's medical expenses. All of them. The best doctors, the best facility, around-the-clock care. Whatever she needs. The room fell silent again. Even Alexander's wealthy guests seemed shocked by the offer. This wasn't the Alexander they knew, the man who usually only spent money on himself. And what would you want in return? Maya asked coldly. Because I'm not stupid. Rich people don't just give away money without expecting something back. Nothing, Alexander said, and for the first time in years he meant it completely. I wouldn't want anything in return. Maya laughed, but there was no humor in it. Right. So you're telling me you'd spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a complete stranger just because you feel guilty about being rude at a party? Alexander looked around the room at his guests, all watching this conversation with fascination. A few hours ago, he would have cared what they thought about him, how somehow their opinions seemed less important than earning Maya's trust. 3 hours ago, I would have said no. Alexander admitted, 3 hours ago, I thought I was better than you because I had more money. I thought money was the only thing that mattered. He paused, struggling to find words for feelings he'd never had to express before. But watching you play tonight, hearing your story, I realized I've been wrong about everything. You gave up fame and fortune for love. I've spent my whole life accumulating wealth and looking down on everyone else. Maya studied his face, searching for signs of deception. So this is what, your guilty conscience making you feel better about yourself? Maybe partly, Alexander said honestly, but also because you deserve better than working 3 jobs just to survive. Your talent shouldn't be wasted playing background music in hotel lobbies. Dr. Harrison stepped forward again. Maya, if Alexander is serious about this offer, you should consider it. The music world has missed you terribly. It's not that simple, Maya said, though her voice had lost some of its hardness. Even if somehow my grandmother's care was taken care of, I can't just jump back into performing. It's been 3 years. I'm out of practice, out of shape. And frankly, I'm not sure I remember how to be that person anymore. Alexander found himself wanting to convince her, not for his own sake, but because he could see the longing in her eyes when she talked about music. What if we started small? He suggested. 1 performance with Dr. Harrison's orchestra. See how it feels. I don't have the right clothes for performing, Maya said, but Alexander could tell she was starting to consider the possibility. That's easily solved, Victoria chimed in. I know the best designers in the city. We could have you fitted for a concert gown in a day. Maya looked overwhelmed by all the sudden attention and offers of help. This is crazy. This morning I woke up worried about paying for my grandmother's medication. Now you're all talking about concert gowns and performances with the Philharmonic. Life can change quickly, Alexander said softly. Mine certainly has tonight. Maya was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Everyone in the room waited to hear what she would say. If I were to consider this, she said slowly, I would need to see my grandmother first. I need to make sure she's properly settled before I could even think about anything else. Of course, Alexander said immediately. Whatever you need. And I would want to visit the facility where she'd be staying. I need to make sure it's really the best place for her, not just the most expensive. Absolutely. We can arrange visits to several facilities so you can choose the one you think is best. Maya looked at him carefully. You're really serious about this, aren't you? More serious than I've ever been about anything, Alexander replied. Over the next few days, Alexander found himself in completely unfamiliar territory. Instead of spending his time in board meetings and business deals, he was researching memory care facilities and talking to doctors about Alzheimer's treatment. He visited Maya's small apartment to meet her grandmother, a tiny woman named Rose who had moments of clarity mixed with confusion. During one of her clear moments, she looked at Alexander with sharp, intelligent eyes. You're the piano man, Rose said, surprising him. I'm sorry? Alexander asked. Maya told me about the piano man. She said you heard her play. Yes, I did. She's incredibly talented, Rose smiled. She gets that from her mother. My daughter was musical too before the accident. Her expression grew sad. Maya gave up everything for me, you know. I tell her she should go back to music, but she won't leave me. What if she didn't have to choose? Alexander asked gently. What if she could do both? Rose studied him for a long moment. You really want to help her, don't you? This isn't some rich man's game? No games, Alexander promised. I just want to do the right thing for once in my life. Meanwhile, Maya was struggling with her own doubts. The offer seemed too good to be true, and she'd learned not to trust things that seemed perfect. She visited the memory care facilities Alexander had arranged for her to see. Each one was better than anything she could have imagined affording. The staff was kind, the rooms were comfortable, and the specialized programs for Alzheimer's patients were impressive. At the 3rd facility, she met with the director, a warm woman named Dr. Patricia Williams. We've heard about your situation, Dr. Williams said. Mr. Blackwell explained that your grandmother would need our best care while you pursue your music career. I'm not sure I have a music career anymore, Maya said honestly. Well, from what we understand, you're quite talented. Your grandmother should be proud. She is, but she's also the reason I had to stop performing. I couldn't abandon her. Dr. Williams nodded understandingly. Family comes first. But sometimes the best way to honor the people we love is to live up to our potential. Your grandmother raised a remarkable woman. Maybe it's time to let that woman shine again. That evening, Maya sat in her grandmother's room watching Rose sleep peacefully. The woman who had given up everything to raise her was now forgetting more each day. Soon Rose might not even remember who Maya was, but right now, in this moment, Maya could still see glimpses of the strong, loving woman who had shaped her life. "What should I do, Grandma?" Maya whispered. "Is it okay to want something for myself again?" As if she'd heard the question, Rose opened her eyes and looked directly at Maya. "Baby girl," Rose said clearly, "when I was young, I wanted to be a teacher. But I never got the chance. When your mother was young, she wanted to be a musician. But she died too soon. Now you have a chance to do what we couldn't. Don't waste it because you're afraid." Tears rolled down Maya's cheeks. "But what if I fail?"
What if I'm not good enough anymore?
"Then you'll try again," Rose said simply. "That's what we do. We try, we fail, we get up, we try again. But we don't give up on our dreams because we're scared." The next morning, Maya called Alexander. "I'll do it," she said simply. "One performance. We'll see what happens after that." Alexander felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine happiness that had nothing to do with money or success. "Maya," he said, "I promise you won't regret this." "I hope you're right," she replied, "because I'm terrified." 3 weeks later, Maya stood backstage at Lincoln Center, her hands shaking as she tried to calm her nerves. Through the curtain, she could hear the murmur of the audience filling the concert hall. It had been over 3 years since she'd performed for a crowd this size. Alexander sat in the front row, more nervous than Maya was. He'd never cared this much about someone else's success before. Over the past few weeks, he'd watched Maya transform from an exhausted caregiver back into the confident artist she used to be. Her grandmother, Rose, was settled into Sunset Manor, the memory care facility Maya had chosen. It was the best in the state, with a garden Rose loved to sit in and music therapy sessions that seemed to help her remember happy moments from the past. Maya had visited Rose that morning before the concert. "Today's the big day, Grandma," Maya had said, adjusting Rose's favorite blanket around her shoulders. Rose had looked at her with clear, loving eyes. "I know, sweetheart. I remember when you were little, you used to play concerts for me on that old piano in our apartment. You were always meant for bigger stages. What if I mess up? What if I've forgotten how to do this?" Rose had taken Maya's hands in her own wrinkled ones. "Music doesn't leave you, baby girl. It lives in your heart. Just close your eyes and let it out." Now standing behind the stage curtain, Maya tried to hold on to those words. Dr. Harrison appeared beside her, looking distinguished in his formal conductor's attire. "How are you feeling?" he asked kindly. "Terrified," Maya admitted. "I keep thinking about all the things that could go wrong. Do you know what I was thinking about when I saw you play at Alexander's party?" Dr. Harrison asked. Maya shook her head. "I was thinking that I'd finally found what we've been missing. Technical skill is common among pianists, but the ability to make people feel something, to touch their souls through music, that's rare. And you have it in abundance." Maya took a deep breath. "What if 3 years away was too long? What if I'm not the same musician I used to be?" "You're not the same musician," Dr. Harrison agreed. "You're better. You've lived through hardship, you've made sacrifices for love. You've learned what really matters in life. All of that comes through in your music now." The stage manager approached them. "5 minutes, Ms. Chen." Maya's heart raced faster. In the audience, Alexander checked his watch nervously. He'd invited some of his business associates and friends from the party, but he'd also made sure to invite people who truly loved music. He wanted Maya to have an audience that would appreciate her talent. Victoria sat next to him, elegant in a blue evening gown. "She's going to be wonderful," Victoria whispered. "I hope so," Alexander replied. "She deserves this moment." Behind them sat a surprise guest that Alexander had arranged, a music critic from the New York Times who specialized in classical piano. If Maya's performance went well, the review could help restart her career. Backstage, Maya was doing her final warm-up exercises, running through scales to keep her fingers loose. She'd chosen to perform Chopin's Piano Concerto No. 1 in E minor, the same piece she'd played with the New York Symphony 5 years ago. It was a challenging piece, but one that held special meaning for her. Her mother had loved Chopin, and Maya felt like performing it was a way to honor both her mother's memory and her grandmother's sacrifice. "Places. Everyone," the stage manager called. Maya walked onto the stage to thunderous applause. The concert hall was packed, and she could see Alexander in the front row, giving her an encouraging smile. She sat at the beautiful Steinway concert grand, not unlike the one in Alexander's penthouse, but this one belonged to everyone who loved music. As the orchestra prepared behind her, Maya closed her eyes and thought about her journey. 3 years ago, she'd been a rising star with the world at her feet. Then life had changed everything, and she'd learned that some things were more important than career success. But now, thanks to an unexpected encounter with an arrogant billionaire who had learned to see beyond his own privilege, she had a chance to have both. Dr. Harrison raised his baton, and the orchestra began the opening measures of the concerto. Maya's hands found the keys, and suddenly all her nervousness disappeared. The music flowed through her like water, natural and effortless. But this performance was different from her earlier career. Before, she'd played with technical perfection but held something back, afraid to be too vulnerable on stage. Now, she held nothing back. Every note carried the weight of her experiences, her grief over her parents' death, her love for Rose, her sacrifice and struggle, and her gratitude for this second chance. In the audience, people began to realize they were witnessing something special. This wasn't just a good performance. This was transcendent. Alexander found tears in his eyes as he listened. He'd heard Maya play that night at his party, but this was even more powerful. Surrounded by a full orchestra with professional lighting and acoustics, her talent blazed like a star. Victoria was crying openly, not caring if her makeup ran. Around them, other audience members were equally moved. Some had their eyes closed, lost in the music. Others leaned forward in their seats, not wanting to miss a single note. When Maya reached the final movement of the concerto, the music became joyful and triumphant. Her fingers danced across the keys with impossible speed and precision, but more than that, they sang with pure happiness. This was where she belonged, not serving drinks at parties or playing background music in hotel lobbies, but here, sharing her gift with people who understood its value. The final notes rang out across the concert hall, and for a moment there was complete silence. Then the audience exploded into applause that seemed to shake the building itself. Maya stood and took her bow, overwhelmed by the response. She looked out at the crowd and saw Alexander on his feet, clapping harder than anyone. Next to him, Victoria was beaming through her tears. Dr. Harrison joined her at the front of the stage for their bow together, and Maya could see his proud smile. The orchestra members were applauding too, showing their respect for her performance. But the most meaningful moment came when Maya spotted a familiar face in the audience. Rose's friend Helen had brought a tablet, and there on the screen was Rose herself watching from her room at Sunset Manor. Even through the video connection, Maya could see her grandmother's proud smile and the tears of joy on her face. 6 months later, Maya had performed with orchestras in 3 different cities and had a recording contract with a major classical music label. But the most important change wasn't in her career. She and Alexander had grown closer through their shared commitment to helping others. They'd started a foundation that provided music education to children from low-income families and supported caregivers who'd had to give up their careers. Maya still visited Rose every day, and Rose had good days where she remembered everything clearly. On those days, she would ask Maya to play piano in the facility's music room, and other residents would gather to listen. Alexander often joined these informal concerts, and Maya had noticed how much he'd changed. The arrogant man who'd mocked people at his party had become someone who used his wealth to lift others up, instead of looking down on them. One evening, after a particularly beautiful performance for the residents, Alexander pulled Maya aside. "I have something to ask you," he said, looking nervous. "What is it?" "That night at my party, I made a ridiculous promise about marrying anyone who could play piano." "We all know that was just foolish arrogance," Maya nodded, wondering where he was going with this. "But what if I asked you now, not because of some stupid bet, but because I've fallen in love with the woman who taught me what real worth looks like?" Maya looked at him in surprise. Over the months, she'd grown to care for Alexander deeply, but she'd never expected this. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Alexander smiled and got down on one knee, pulling out a ring box. "Maya Chen, will you marry me? Not because of a piano challenge, but because you've changed my life in every way that matters." Maya thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with arrogance and anger, but had grown into something beautiful and real. "Yes," she said simply, "but only if you promise to keep supporting music education for kids who might not otherwise get the chance." "Always," Alexander promised as he slipped the ring onto her finger. A year later, their wedding was a simple ceremony at Sunset Manor so Rose could attend. Maya played piano for their first dance, and in the audience sat dozens of children from their music program, along with caregivers who'd been able to return to their dreams because of the foundation's support. It wasn't the fairy tale ending anyone might have expected from that night at Alexander's party. It was something better, a real love built on mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that the best things in life aren't bought with money, but earned through kindness and dedication to something bigger than yourself.